Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I know you can't change the channel, but don't change the channel. I am not Blake. I'm Greg, the Director of Horticulture, and we're going to do a little bit of a switcheroo today. We like to keep you on your toes at all times if possible. It's also November 1st, in case you haven't noticed. And what we're going to do today is Blake is going to talk to y'all about bonsai, things you do with bonsai at this time of the year. And wanted to switch things up and do something different and let him do some of the fun stuff. And it's a really, really good topic. It's going to be a good one. So hold on to your hats, take lots of notes, and please ask us lots of questions at the very, very end. So let's get to the topic at hand. Blake is going to talk to y'all about the very important topic of bonsai and what you do with bonsai this time of the year. It's something we get asked about quite a bit here, and it would be nice if we could focus on that more here. So I'm going to turn it over to Blake and look forward to hearing what he has to say.
All righty. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today on this midweek program. Thank you, Greg, for those wonderful announcements filling in for me. You did a fantastic job.
High standards. High standards.
Wow. Okay. Well, today on our program, we're going to go over some November gardening tasks. Just yesterday, Greg came up to my office and asked me if I had any ideas about what we might do for our program today. And I was like, well, now's the time of year that we're wiring bonsai trees, and now's also a very good time of year to be repotting trees as well. So today I plan to take one of our little trees and I want to pot it up for you, show you how to pot a bonsai tree. And then I'm going to take another and different tree and I will show you, well, two trees, and show you the fundamentals of wiring your bonsai trees. Okie dokie. So, gosh, I don't even know if I really even want to get into, no, I don't need to get into the history of bonsai at all. We're just here to learn about how to do it. So this right here is a Japanese black pine. This is Pinus thunbergii. I started growing this from seed at the beginning of 2020. So this is like 3.5 years old. Now, when I was studying bonsai in Japan, I was informed that it takes about 5 years for a bonsai tree to start looking like anything good. So this one's getting there. It's getting close there. It's not quite ready to be shown, but we're here showing it anyway because we can, and it's a beautiful day to do it. I've been growing them out in just regular old nursery pots because that's what I have. I don't love growing them in regular nursery pots because it makes the root system go a little bit deeper. But today I've got some much shallower pots that I want to force this little tree into because it wants to be a bonsai tree for the rest of its life, and we can't have it have real deep roots. We gotta cut it off somewhere. So when it comes to picking a bonsai pot, you need to follow your heart. Like, this is an art form. Like, we're making a beautiful object here, and there are all sorts of rules about design and guidelines that you might want to follow with regards to the shape of the pot, the depth of the pot, the color of your pot. For example, it's often practiced amongst bonsai practitioners that evergreen plants such as this will go into a non-glazed pot because it helps with the contrast of it. As you might imagine, if you've got a glazed pot like this, you've got the green, it's maybe, it's not as dramatic as it possibly could be against the unglazed of this pot here. It pops a little bit more. Another thing you want to consider is the depth of the pot. So this tree, being 4 years old, is not super duper thick. Honestly, and I will share with you a good rule of thumb for aesthetics for bonsai pot selection is you would like your pot to be about as deep as the trunk of your tree is wide. Okay, so what was that?
Show that again.
What did I show?
The depth should be the width. Sorry, I couldn't get it.
It's fine. You heard what I said. and rules are meant to be acknowledged and respected to a certain degree, and then maybe it's up to you whether or not you adhere to them. But so obviously with what I just told you, like from an aesthetic point of view, this unglazed pot would be preferable. But honestly, today, I want to put this tree into this glazed pot. I don't care about the contrast, that there's not much of it. I personally think that this green with this green is very beautiful. And this tree is my tree, and I love it. I am excited to put this tree in this pot, and I don't care what the rules say. Those aren't relevant right now. This is me, okay? So this pot the reason I don't want to put it in this pot today is the depth of it. Like if I put it in here, it's just going to be swimming in there, and I don't want to do that. I really want to focus on restricting the roots and getting it into this pot. So this is the pot I'm doing today. The way we set up our bonsai pots to get bonsai trees into them. First and foremost, your bonsai pot, it has to have drainage holes. Oh my gosh. It has to have drainage holes. There's no question about it. Big hole, the bigger the holes, the better. And with big holes, that's what this screen is for. This is just plastic screen. I got this from Michael's. You can get them at other craft stores. I think it's used primarily for needlepoint is what it's supposed to be, but I use it to cover up big holes in the bottom of my containers so that I can still have really good drainage, but am not losing soil out the bottom. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to cut little squares out of this that are big enough to cover the holes, and I'm doing a little bit bigger than I need to just because I'm kind of not rushing, but I'm not, going pokey with it. But so I've got 2 little squares. Wonderful. I'm excited about that. I'm just going to put them over the holes there. And then to affix them to the holes, you use wire. And wire is something I will get into when I get into talking about wiring bonsai trees. But this is a very critical tool for bonsai. They come in aluminum and copper. I personally feel like aluminum is preferable for this particular task. I don't love putting copper into the soil of my bonsai plants because copper is a micronutrient of plants, and if you have too much copper in large quantities, that can cause issues to the health of the plant. So just to avoid issues with micronutrients and stuff, I am just going to use aluminum wire for this one. Fancy pantsy bonsai aluminum wire. But all you do is you just cut a little length of it. I'm cutting 2 lengths of it because I got 2 little screens. And then all you do, and I'm just gonna hold it, I'll hold it here, Alexander, how about that? And you're just gonna bend it like a pin, just a nice little pin there. And then I'm going to stick it in the holes of the screen. Great. And now there's a nice little pin. I'll just go ahead and take this guy out. Shove the pin through your hole like that. It's poking out the bottom, yeah. And then we'll just flatten that there. I could go in, again, you can be as, I don't even know the word, hands-on, finicky, picky about it as you want. You could be sloppy with it too if you want. It's an art. Keep in mind, if you want it to look nice, then by all means make it look nice. But if that's not you, then don't get bogged down with that. Just let it be what it's going to be. And also keep in mind that this tree is not even 4 years old. It's an infant still, from a perspective of bonsai. Like, this is nowhere close to being world-class show ready or anything like that. Like, I'm just making a tree that looks nice and makes me happy. Okay, so I've got screen in the bottom of the pot. It's all affixed in there. Ain't no soil going out down that way. Now the next step is a very important one. We need more wire. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take wire and we're gonna feed it up through the bottom of the pot. And what this will allow us to do is anchor our bonsai tree into this tiny little pot once we've got it in there. But so I just did, the length I chose is such that I'm imagining that it's coming up out of the 2 drainage holes, and then I want to be able to fold it over, and then I'm going to need to be able to twist it at some point. So this is more than enough of a length, and you'll just kind of stick it in the pot and kind of go with the size of the pot. but then it just comes up through the drainage holes. You just stick one end in there, and you just stick another end in there, and then I'm gonna pull it all the way through. And then I'm just gonna flatten this here on the bottom, kind of spread this out a little bit so there's room for the plant. Okay, next step, soil. Oh boy, this is bonsai soil that I make myself with component pieces, parts that I acquire from various landscape supply wholesalers and that kind of thing. I will say that Espoma makes a brand of bonsai soil that is essentially identical to the brand that I make. So that if you don't want to go out of your way and get big bags of materials and mix it all up by hand and then sift it, then you may just go ahead and buy Espoma's brand. It works. It works. But what my soil is composed of, there's no real formula. I just do like maybe like a third of each, but it's granite, crushed granite, about 1/4 inch in diameter. I use chicken grit. I go to Tractor Supply Company and I buy a huge 25, well, no, not huge. It's just a big 25-pound bag of chicken grit, and it's just 1/4 inch granite. It is perfect. Honestly, when I was studying bonsai in Japan, we grew our bonsai trees in straight crushed granite. It was just 1/4 inch crushed granite. I would be very happy to grow bonsai trees in just chicken grit. And the reason for this is mainly because we're keeping these plants in pots for a very, very long time, and you need drainage. That was the critical point with the big drainage holes. You need drainage because if your pot isn't able to drain, water will sit in the pot and the roots may rot, and then you no longer have a tree. So drainage is the #1 concern. That's why it is very acceptable to use just straight up chicken grit. In addition to chicken grit, I have a product in here called Turfus, which is a calcined clay product. If you have ever played baseball, it is what baseball infields are made out of, basically. And you can buy huge 50-pound bags of that for dirt cheap because it's used to line baseball fields. And I am fairly certain that it is chemically equivalent to the fancy red clay products specifically for bonsai that you'll pay 5 to 10 times more for. The idea is that it's a clay product that drains. So it's clay that behaves like rock. And the fun thing about clay is clay holds nutrients really, really well. But the problem with clay is that it holds water too well for container growing situations. So what's wonderful about Turfus is that it's got the cation exchange capacity of clay, but it's got the drainage of rock. So it's really an ideal container substrate. It's not ideal from a production perspective because it's heavier than, say, pine bark or peat, and weight is a huge consideration in the nursery when you're moving plants around and having to ship them and that kind of stuff. But if you're not in a nursery and it's just your plant, just Turfus. It's amazing. It's a really, really great substrate component. And then I also top everything off with soil conditioner, pine bark fines that, you just go to any of the big box stores, again, get big old bags of the stuff. It's just really pulverized pine bark. The finer the grain, the better, just because big pieces will make for really big holes, and you don't necessarily need really big holes in your tiny little pot, but you do need pore space in your container so that there's room for water and air and roots and all that stuff. So it's a nice, happy environment for your plant. Okay, so we've got this beautiful soil, and to just start things off, I'm just gonna put like a little bitty mountain, just gonna cover the bottom of the container, and I just kind of mound it up in a little mountain like that, because when I put the tree in, it's gonna push it down and spread it all out and get it all in the roots and stuff and all that jazz. So that is what a bonsai pot looks like when it is ready to accept trees. And here I have the tree that is going to go in it. Now, I don't remember if I did pull it out and showed you earlier, but here's the root ball. It's pretty well root bound. This is about the time that it would need to be repotted. But so this has to get in there. And that's always like the main problem with bonsai, but it's okay. Plants are super duper sturdy, resilient, all that jazz. We are going to break up this root ball, and we are going to, well, I'm going to start by breaking up the root ball. When I got home yesterday after work, after deciding that we were going to do this topic, it was raining yesterday. So I went and picked this tree out and brought it inside so that it might dry out a little bit. Repotting bonsai trees when they're wet is terrible. It's awful. You cannot get the roots off. It's just, you just damage the heck out of the roots over and over again. But if it's drier, it kind of just flakes off. This substrate that I've been growing this tree in since birth is, it's what I had at the time. I used a professional grade peat pine bark mix, and I amended it with permatil just because I had access to those things for free, and it is not. And also I had the idea that I might try to engineer a substrate that can hold more water, because people often lose bonsai trees to underwatering because they forget to water it on one day. And that's one of the problems with these really heavily draining soils, is it requires very frequent watering. And so I thought, oh, if I have a substrate that's, you know, it holds more water, then people won't have to water it so frequently, and they'll have more success with their bonsai plants. What I found, however, is that while yes, I didn't have to water as much, that's not great. Like, I wanted to be able to water it. The thing is that in the heat of the summertime, when it's like 95 degrees outside, the roots in the pot, they're just sat there baking, and you really want to be able to put water on them to cool them down. But like, if the substrate doesn't drain enough, there's just always water in that substrate, and like, then the plant can't breathe. Like, the water needs to drain out so that air can get sucked into the pores, so that it can, that's how they pick up oxygen. It's from the roots, which, you know, doesn't make much sense to me, but that's just how they do it. But so if your substrate holds too much water, then the plant will just not be able to get oxygen, and that's a problem. Okay, but I've got most of the roots off of here. Okay, and this is a bonsai tree, and we do need to consider these roots because they are at some point in the future going to be up on the surface, and we need to look at them and consider problems. And I will point out one problem here. It's just a little noisy in here, and we've got a root crossing over another root, and that's just not great. So I'm probably just going to cut that little guy off there. Now, I do have scissors that I use for the top of my tree, but I don't use the top scissors for the roots. I've got special scissors for roots. They're special because I no longer care about them. And I can just go in here and snip, snip. There you go. All better. So that's no longer going across the top of this root, and it no longer has any threat of choking that one later. Another thing you can do, you can just kind of pick it off. I tell you, when I was in Japan, you pinch things, you just pick them off just as much as you use scissors and tools and stuff. But so, okay, that's mostly okay. Another thing that's worth pointing out here now, I am in full sun doing this. You want to be mindful of how dry your roots are. It's pretty cold today, so I feel okay about it, but you might want to be under cover just so that you're not, and if you're doing it slower, then it's definitely, you want to be wary of whether or not it's drying out. There's not too many, once you got it out of the pot and got all the roots out, it's also an opportunity to cut out any like big honking roots that aren't doing your plant any favors. I've got one here that's just going straight down, and it's bigger than the others. And there is some fibrous root on there that I kind of like, but I think it's better to just get rid of the whole thing. So I'm just cutting that off. There's another big root. I'll probably just cut it there. just to make it easier to get it into the pot. And then I've got another fat-ish guy in here. Great. Great. This is a good time of year to do this because it's a time of year when air temperatures are cooler, so the tops of the trees aren't growing, but there's still sun. In a garden situation, in the ground holds a lot of heat, and so that contributes to root growth. Obviously, if we are in a container, we don't hold on to as much heat as we would in the ground, but because it's in a container, we can move it easily. So like, it's supposed to get real cold tonight, so I'm going to put this in this pot, and then this tree is going to have a sleepover with me inside tonight, and maybe even tomorrow night if it's cold again tomorrow. But in the near future, it's going to warm up again, and then it's going to go right outside in full sun, and it's going to bask in the glory of the sun, and its roots are going to be warmed by the sun and get a little bit of a head start going into the winter. Yes, so I think, okay, I could start, okay. And this is art again. So the way in which it goes into the container is something to consider, to think about. The movement of the trunk, here's a fun thing. You can see maybe this tree is bending towards you, like it's bowing towards you. That's something to consider. If I turned it around and it was like this, it's moving away from you. And if you got to think about the front of the tree, how it's going to be viewed, what you're trying to express with it. And if the tree is facing away from the person who's looking at it, that's just rude. Don't make your plant do that to other people. It teaches some good manners. Consider how it's going to be viewed, how it's going to be seen. And I am just kind of winging it here. I kind of trust that the front there that you see is probably good enough. I want to come down. You also want to think about balance, like visual balance. Like if I've got the plant over here, it's heavy on this side, and it's just like, why is nothing over here? That doesn't make sense. If I'm over here, it's more balanced, but I think somewhere in here is what looks good to me. There are some roots spilling over the edge. I could probably just kind of like cut those out a little bit. If I feel like it, I might kind of shove them in. I'll probably just cut them a little bit. When you are sticking roots into your pot, it helps. These are tweezers. You can also use a chopstick, but you just kind of shove your roots, and this is a very shallow pot, so it's not going to do much, but this kind of helps get the roots shoved down into the soil so that they aren't, too exposed to air and that kind of thing. Yeah, and I'm just going to pick off some of these roots coming out of the back here with my hand, and I'm just going to do this with my hand. Okay, that's good. And then I can just start. Actually, I need to put a little bit more substrate in there. I'm liking this. Okay. But I've just got it started there with the substrate, and so now I want to wire it in. Okay, and that's what this wire is for. And I'm basically just pulling it together over the roots so that they're staying in there, and I'm being mindful of the roots because you could potentially kind of squeeze them, and that's not great. You can cause damage to some more important roots if you're not careful. If you have a root that you need to protect, you are able to take that plastic screening that I was using before, and you can cut little bits of it, and like you can maybe put it between the tree and the wire, and this kind of helps like spread out the force that the wire is putting on the tree so that it won't cut in as severely. I think today I'm okay with where I'm able to find the wire. So, okay. Okay, so I've got it at a place where I'm ready to start twisting the wire. Now, Bonsai pliers. These are, you use this tool more than any other bonsai tool if you're doing it from like the Japanese perspective with all the wire and stuff. You see how the two, I don't know what you call these, but how they kind of make a point? That helps you grip wire. You can buy needle nose pliers that kind of hug each other the whole way up. Those do not grab wire particularly well. If they come together at a point like these do, it grabs them super well, and it's super easy and beautiful and wonderful, and I am ready for it. And all you do is you just go in and grab the wire and you twist it. Okay. And you twist it. Okay. And while you're twisting, you kind of pull it. And while you pull, you kind of twist. And while you do that, it gets tighter and tighter. And that, oh gosh. And when you can pick the tree up by just the tree and the pot comes with it, you know that's good enough. And you don't really need to do more than that. So that is situated pretty well. I'm gonna hand tighten it a little bit just because I like it. Have something to grab onto and move. Okay, but then I can cut the excess off with my wire cutters, kind of tuck that down and hide it a little bit. And then I can take more substrate and kind of sprinkle it in there. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I love it. I love it. Getting nice and sprinkled in there. And then again, with the tweezers or chopsticks, you stick it in there and kind of wiggle it around. And the sticking in and wiggling is how you just kind of work the soil in between all the little nooks and crannies, getting rid of any humongous air pockets. Obviously, remember the air pockets are where the water goes, where the air goes, where the roots goes. So like that's premium, like that space is what we want. If you are using like a fine grain, like a peat-based substrate, you do not want to do this step that I'm doing now because that's going to overly compact your substrate. The substrate I'm using, because it's very rocky and everything's like pretty uniform size of about 1/4 inch, even if it's pretty well compacted, it maintains good pore space. So you'll still be able to have water and roots and air and all that good stuff. So you can really, I mean, I'm telling you, when I was in Japan, we spent more time than I felt comfortable doing this, just making sure there were no huge air pockets. But I am maybe little less picky about that. I can't imagine there's huge air pockets in here. But yeah, that'll do. And I don't have a brush with me, but a brush is a brilliant tool to have here. You could just take your brush and just kind of brush the edges off, make it look nice. Make it look nice and pretty and presentable. It's a big old piece of bark there. Just get rid of that. Okay. Brilliant. So that's that. I like it. I like it. One thing I wanted to do here, this is not the time of year to be pruning stuff, but if you have a reason to prune, it's always appropriate to prune. And my reason for pruning this guy right here is that pine trees, all of their strength goes towards the top, which means you need to protect everything lower down. Everything lower down is at risk of being shaded out, and then if it's shaded out, it's just not going to grow, and then you're going to lose that branch. And if you lose that branch, that's it, because these are evergreen, these are conifers. They don't have latent buds underneath to get new branches out from there. You pretty much have to graft from that point forward if you lose a lower branch. So it's just very important to make sure that you don't have too much activity up top And then it's also because we're going into winter soon, when you prune out stuff, it makes more room for light, more room for airflow, just happy, healthy stuff. When I was in Japan, I was in Ritsuin Koen in Takamatsu, which is their big Japanese garden. They were out in the garden in like December 12th, pruning Japanese black pine, which in my mind, that's not the time of year to do that. But it's like, okay, but it's the middle of winter and you're opening up this tree, letting in more light, letting in more airflow. It's good for the tree. And obviously those trees have been there for hundreds of years. So they're doing something right with it. So I'm not too concerned about this, but just this guy up here, he's too tall. I don't like that. So I'm just going to cut that there. And like, I could be more finicky with this, but I'm not going to because it's just a baby. He's got his whole life ahead of him. I don't need to put too much fuss into it now. He's got to recover from the repotting, that's for sure. And then we'll just go from there. One thing, and you need to water it, and I'll water it later for sure. But it's important. It's not done till it's watered. And actually, I'm just going to put this down and do it because it needs it, and I love it. And you can't really see it, and I'm sorry about that.
We got you.
You do?
Yep.
Well, that's wonderful. So yeah, just giving it some water. It's a little sweetheart. I don't know. In Japan, they're insistent on getting the leaves wet when you water. I learned that physiologically that kind of slows down its ability to transpire and contributes to foliar diseases. But again, like, I'm not the one who's been growing bonsai trees for hundreds of years, so there's something to be learned everywhere. You know, don't always rely too heavily on what you think you know. Okay, so that's that. What time is it, Greg?
We are. How easy a question to ask. 334.
334, brilliant. Okay, good. So I will show you guys some wiring stuff. Okay, so I've got this tree, which is a Japanese maple, Acer palmatum, that I dug out of this very arboretum earlier this very year. This was a seedling, a volunteer seedling from the arboretum. We have hundreds of thousands of these that pop up in the garden every year. If you're a volunteer, I'm sure you're allowed to take as many as you want. Like, they're there, they just get thrown in the compost pile otherwise. But yeah, it's this came into my life this year. It has grown. It's at a place now where it can take its first wiring. It's a little on the small side. When I was in Japan, I was taught that you let a thing grow 2 years before you do the first wiring, but I've managed to get some biomass on some plants in 1 year that was as much biomass as the 2-year-old plants that we were wiring in Japan. So I feel pretty confident that this is a reasonable size to wire, but I would say that this is the smallest size that you would want to wire. This is very small. It'll be very easy to bend and manipulate, which is another consideration. You can let them get bigger, but if you let them get bigger, you need to use thicker wire, and it's going to be a lot more stress to the tree. If you do it when it's very young and it's very limber, it's not as much stress to the tree. So I like to do it at this stage. Bonsai wire comes in basically 2 flavors. You've got aluminum and you've got copper, and they have their pros and their cons. Here's some very thin copper wire. Okay, pros and cons. Okay, aluminum is cheap. It is so much cheaper than copper wire. It is easier to work with than copper wire. Well, to an extent, sort of, but not really. I'll kind of elaborate on that in a little bit, but it's cheaper than copper. Okay, so the thing about copper wire is it's expensive and it's been annealed. And what that means is it's been heated to a very high temperature such that the molecules, they start to agitate and they start to kind of organize themselves, which is a lot of fun. And they kind of make nice regular patterns once they've been heated up. And when they're all in a nice and regular pattern, it is very easy to bend. And it bends and it's supple and it's nice. But while you're bending it, you are disrupting that nice and uniform pattern and making it less uniform, and you're making it harder, and it just gets harder. So the thing about copper is it starts out, it's softer than aluminum, but once it's been worked, it's harder than aluminum. And that's very nice, but the issue is then you can't reuse copper unless you anneal it again, and that contributes to it being expensive. And aluminum you can reuse if you would like. Another thing about aluminum is it's not quite as strong as copper, so like this gauge of wire and this gauge of wire will probably kind of hold the same amount of they'll probably bend the same size branches. So like with copper, with aluminum, you're going to be using more wire, you're going to be using thicker wire. It's not necessarily going to look as pretty, but it'll be easier for you to see, because you need to be mindful about the wire on your tree, because your tree is growing and your tree will thicken up, and eventually the wire will start to cut into the bark of the tree. And you want to take the wire off before that happens. And if you're using copper wire, it's kind of hard to see when that's happening. And so I recommend aluminum wire for beginners, and I recommend copper wire for people who have been doing bonsai a little bit longer, and who have more reasons to use it. But for this tree today, because of what I said earlier about copper and micronutrients, I'm using aluminum for this particular task of putting the initial bend in this tree. Okay, so a fun rule of thumb for determining what size wire you use for what size tree. If you take your tree and you kind of bend it in your finger, you kind of feel how much resistance it's giving you. You then go to the wire and do the same thing, and you want the resistance in the wire to be about the same as the resistance in the tree. If the wire is too thin, it's not going to hold the tree still. If the wire is too thick, you are going to break that tree immediately, pretty much. So you need to kind of find the right size wire and the way to figure out what gauge it is. And this works if you're using aluminum or copper. You just kind of feel it and then feel it. And I feel good that this is probably 1.5 millimeter, if I'm not mistaken. And this should be good. Okay, the thing about wiring a tree is you only have two options when you're putting your first wire on, and this is significant. You can either wire it counterclockwise up the stem, or you can wire it clockwise. Those are your only two options. If you wire it clockwise, and which one you do depends on the tree. And I mean like individual specimens. Like some trees are going to prefer to be wired clockwise. Some trees are going to prefer to be wired counterclockwise. And you can kind of get a feel for which one it would prefer after you've done it thousands of times. But before you get to that point, you can just pick one side and see what happens. So I am just going to guess. I'll just guess that this one wants to be wired counterclockwise. And what I'm doing is I'm shoving it down into the dirt, into the soil in the pot alongside the roots to anchor it. That is an important step. You need to be anchoring it. And then I'm going to just wrap it up the tree. And what I'm thinking about while I'm doing this is I'm trying to maintain a 45-degree angle on the wire as I move up the tree. If the angle on the wire's too steep, it's just going to be springy, and if it's too flat, it's just not going to hold it. So 45 degrees is the right angle. Okay, and then of course, as you move your way up, you will eventually encounter a node, and you can kind of adjust that angle on your wiring to kind of miss the node so that you don't knock any leaves off. That is the main consideration. This is autumn, so I really don't care if I knock off these leaves because it's getting what it needs from them right now, and I can lose whatever I need, which is part of the reason that this is a good time of year to be doing this. Another reason that it's a good time of year to be doing this is because, like I said before, the trees continue to grow and eventually the wire will cut into the bark. And sometimes you can, if you wire your bonsai trees in spring, it'll start to cut into the bark before it sets its shape, and that's no good. So if you do it at this time of year, it gives the tree plenty of time to get to set itself, to lignify is the fun fancy science word. Yeah, it just gives it time without making it grow too fast and without having to worry too much about it cutting in. So I'm just gonna speed this along. Just kind of wrap it up, moving the leaves out of the way. With pine trees, it's a little bit difficult because there's a million leaves all over the place, and you just kind of move them out of the way as you go. The thing about wiring is it is a skill, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. And if you don't practice it, then you just won't be good at it. But it's just something that you just got to do over and over and over again a million times, and it's the only way to do it. But anyway, I'm here at the top, so I'm just gonna take my wire cutters. Just gonna cut off my wire there. Alrighty. Now I said if you wire it clockwise, you have to twist it clockwise. If you wire it clockwise and twist it counterclockwise, the wire is just not going to be there to support it. So because I've wired it this way, I need to bend it clockwise. Oh, what I was saying before about the tree determines which way you wire. It's because if you put wire on this clockwise and try to bend it, it may resist you. It may not want to go clockwise. And in that instance, you unwire it, try doing it counterclockwise, and then you'll see, oh, it actually does bend this way and it does want to go this way. And you want to do that because you'll be able to get a more interesting tree, you'll be able to get more movement in the tree, and it'll also put less stress on the tree. So really, the tree has a preference for which way it wants to go, and it's up to you as the bonsai artist to figure out what the tree's preference is and then go with that. Like, you don't want to fight this thing. We're not here to impose our will on nature. We're here to work alongside nature and bring out the best in these beautiful trees. But so I've got it wired. I've got my pliers here. When I was in Japan, we never move a wired branch with your hands. Always do it with wires. You always want to have a hand on the tree while you're moving it with wires, but you always move it with the wires, with the pliers. And the way you do it, you just grab the wire, and I'm just going to do this. This is a little bit high up, but you just grab it and kind of bend it. And then I'm going to move down, and I'm going to grab it, kind of bend it. And then move down and grab it. If I can grab it, kind of bend it. And then I just keep going. Just keep going. You start from the top because that's just where it's easier to bend it. If you start from the bottom, you're probably going to struggle real hard with it and then just snap it off. So don't do that. Start from the top and go little by little. Skoshi zutsu is the Japanese phrase, little by little. It's very important, and you would be surprised, maybe you wouldn't be surprised with what you can accomplish by going little by little. I just read a very beautiful short story earlier today. It was called The Man Who Planted Trees. Please and thank you. Type that into Google. You'll be able to find a free copy of it somewhere online. It was originally published in the 1950s. I learned about this from J.C. Raulston's newsletters from the 80s, and he highly recommended it, and I highly recommend it. It is very much in line with the theme of little by little. And it's about trees. It's very beautiful. Honestly, look it up. But so it is very possible that this tree kind of wanted to go the other way, but I don't care. It's okay. And this isn't great right here now. All right. And so I know I said actually, I think I went the wrong way. This one kind of seems like it wants to go, do as I say, not what I do. I'm about to do this with my fingers here, because it had this weird little bend in it at the bottom that I kind of want to accentuate, and I don't think I wired it the right way to do that. So I'm just doing this. And you know something? This may not be correct, and the tree will tell me that next year when it starts to grow of its own volition in whatever way that it prefers. And another thing to keep in mind with bonsai is that all of this is temporary. Like, just because I'm putting this bend in this branch, I guess, here and now, it doesn't mean that the thing's not going to die off here, but then sprout a new thing from there next year. And it's like, I basically got to start all over. Like, that happens. That's just a part of life. Things don't always, the best laid schemes of mice and men gang after glay, as they say. But all I'm trying to do here is just put interesting movement in the trunk so that at some point in the future, I can accentuate that movement and make a pretty little tree. Actually, gosh, I'm really liking this here and now as it is. But there's that. That's nice. I'm excited for that for next year. But that's how you put the first wire on the tree. And that's super important for how you go forward with the rest of the wire. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes of power on the camera, which is an interesting development. The camera didn't used to have issues with the battery, but apparently it now has issues with the battery amongst other things. So we are not going to get too far into the nitty-gritty of, there's protocols for wiring and there's rules to it, and the only way to learn how to do it is by doing it. I will tell you it is bad form to cross wires. And I will tell you that it is entirely possible to wire an entire tree without crossing wires a single time. And that is the ultimate goal. If you find yourself crossing wires, it's okay. It's not really going to hurt the tree, but it kind of suggests that there are other things going on with the tree that aren't necessarily ideal. But we don't have time to get into that today. And
That means we have to do a part 2.
We might just have to do a part 2.
I definitely think we should. There's a lot.
We can do a part 2.
You just scratched the surface of
yeah,
things.
No. I've only begun to scratch surfaces, really. Like, this is silly. I've done absolutely nothing here today, really.
You've got a lot of stuff going in my mind, and I'm sure in other people's minds too. In the interest of shortness of time, let's get to a couple of questions. And somebody recommended that you do a class, which I think is a good idea. One of the questions is a source for bonsai tools.
A source for bonsai tools. So I get my bonsai tools from a website called Superfly Bonsai because I knew the guy who Superfly Bonsai bought their bonsai stuff from. It was Miko Bonsai from a guy in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. My dad grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, so that's why I had that connection. But I get my stuff from Superfly Bonsai. You can also get your bonsai tools just from like bonsai shows. I know in North Carolina, there's usually an expo at the North Carolina Arboretum in Asheville, usually in October. And then we also have William Volvanis, who's a big name in bonsai. He's up in New York. He puts on a show in Kannapolis, North Carolina in December, usually, the Winter Silhouette Show. I don't know if he's still doing that anymore, but it's a pretty close by show. It's a decent caliber. You'll see some pretty good trees, not amazing trees. There's obviously better trees in other parts of the world, but bonsai shows are always a good place to see vendors who have pots and tools and even plants for sale. But that's what I would recommend mostly. Yeah.
I also recommend going to Japan.
Yeah, I would. If you want to spend $10,000 on a pair of scissors, yes, and you can if you only want to spend $100 on going to Japan is definitely
having been. You see all this stuff in the garden centers, which is fabulous.
Yeah,
because it's such a part of the culture.
For sure.
Very cool stuff. All right, I don't know how much time we have left.
Do another question.
Somebody asked about starting bonsai from seed.
Yeah.
If you want to talk a tiny little bit about that.
Sure. starting bonsai from seed is the greatest. I personally love it. I love the idea of not focusing on cultivars specifically, but just the rich diversity that comes from seed. And it's like every plant is unique, and like that gets emphasized with seed because the genetics of every seed is unique, and you can throw out a whole bunch of different seeds. You might find one that's special. We used to grow, they still do, but ginkgo trees for the plant propagation class in the teaching nursery over there. There was one ginkgo tree seedling that was like just bluer than all the other ones amongst all of them in the year that I was working there. And so I took that ginkgo tree home and wired it, and it is now in a bonsai pot in my front yard. The foliage hasn't stayed as blue as it was when it was in the nursery, but it's like that really appeals to me, is just finding the special characteristics that come out of seedling material and being able to work with that material and emphasize it. Basically, you sow a seed, it grows for a season. You can wire it at the end of that season, or you maybe wait till the next year to wire it. And then from there, you just kind of cut it back. Keep it in pots. The smaller, the better. I love these little 2-inch pots because it's way easier to make a small tree big than it is to make a big tree small. So like I just keep them in as small a pots as I reasonably can. And these 2-inch size are really brilliant for that. But people get turned off by bonsai. They say, oh, I don't have the patience to do bonsai. I argue that bonsai has nothing to do with patience. It's more to do with discipline. The idea being that like a bonsai tree is never finished, and like patience implies that at a certain point it's gonna be done. Like you're trying to get to a certain end goal, but it's like there is no end goal in bonsai. Like we're just growing plants, we're just growing trees in containers. That's what's happening. Like it is happening. Like it requires no patience, because like even though I'm standing here on camera, my hands aren't on these trees at all. Like I am growing bonsai trees. When I'm sitting in my office downstairs, like I am growing bonsai trees. It's always happening. What you need is the discipline to check on them every day. Like they need water, and they're tiny little containers. Maybe they need it every day. They need they need care and attention more than anything. So it's not about waiting to get to some point. It's just about being with your plants every day and giving them what they need and helping them out and helping them become the most beautiful thing they can become.
There's ritual, there's connection to the plants, there's slowing your brain down.
Yes.
All that stuff too, just watching
Yes.
you do it.
Oh yeah.
What more reasons do you need?
Honestly, it is very meditative. If you sit down with a single tree and you're just like picking needles off it, and that's all you're doing all day long, like your brain will go to some pretty marvelous places, and I promise you it's therapy. It really is. It's that good for you, and yeah, it's just good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, let's do a class. Let's do a part 2. Let's do more stuff with bonsai. Thank you for the switcheroo and the suggestion.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's do this again. Thank you for joining us, and look for this on the YouTube channel in the not too distant future. Thanks, y'all.
Awesome.